Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library, episode 500. Yes, we are finally on the 500th regular episode of this series, shortly after its 10th anniversary. I did put up a 10th anniversary video fairly recently, so we're not going to delve too much into the time having passed here, but I'm kind of amazed that we're at episode 500. Then again, sometimes we cover tangential stuff, so hey, maybe it makes perfect sense that we've hit episode 500. I would also note, for what it's worth for those keeping track, that yes, we do have Q&A episodes, and supplemental episodes, and intermission episodes. So really, this is probably episode more like 603 or 609. 603 if you are looking at just the general stuff that's on my YouTube channel, 609 if you count the fact that there were 6 previous versions of that home video timeline video that I used to do that still has its most recent version up but had its earlier 6 versions put onto private and removed out of circulation. So that for me, it's basically episode 609. But for whole number episodes, we're on 500. I thought maybe we should show something a little bit special here. So lots of context here. Jump ahead if you're one of those people who hates hearing me give context and that kind of stuff, because I do want to give some context to what we're going to see here, because I think episode 500 deserves a little bit more time to stew a little bit as we're doing this. So one thing that you will find that I have covered in a Saga on Home Video First Edition back in the day to some degree, and then later in a Saga on Home Video Second Edition, which of course is what you can find now on Amazon in hardback, paperback, or a Kindle print replica version, the 3-volume set. One of the things that is covered, in this case in volume 3, in A Cantina Full of Oddballs chapter, is screeners. The idea that sometimes a company wants to put out something for basically review in some form to try to garner attention, garner publicity, garner something with putting it out there a little bit early. My first screener was the Legacy Revealed fan site screener, which was sent to me as I was running a fan site at the time to actually review that program and talk about it as an unfinished version on DVD. You have other ones that are perhaps sent out to stores to convince them, hey, why don't you carry this item? We saw that with some of the VHS screeners for various Ewoks items previously. You have ones that are for award consideration, like the Episode 1 VHS screener or the Episode 3 DVD screener. For awards, you might have entire collections of things specific to a certain television station that included within it something for Star Wars as a screener as well. Sometimes you'll see more elaborate screeners, like what we saw with the Legacy Revealed, which in that case also gives us an example of something that had 4 different freaking screeners out there. And sometimes they just go way over the top, like this screener for the Clone Wars Season 1 that we saw a while back on the show. But whatever their purpose, a screener is created by the company and provided in limited quantities to specific individuals, organizations, groups, whatever, without the intention of it being widely available. So I've shown a lot of screeners here on the show, but there was one category of screener that I didn't show in the book and have not shown on the show. And that is because I was trying to be respectful over time, because we're talking about the Disney live-action films. And they're fairly recent releases. And they're really sort of a unique place within the history of Star Wars screeners. We're going to look at them here in this episode. But it's just one of those things that for a while there, I just really wasn't comfortable showing them because, A, they were put out on eBay. They're not really supposed to be pushed out on eBay. There are legal questions always circling around screeners, although the case of UMGV Augusto, I think, was the one that pretty much put an end to a lot of the legal questions about screeners, though it's an interesting way they try to get around it with these. It's one of those things where it's kind of like, eh, to talk about them, even though I did manage to collect some of them. And my thought was, you know what? At this point, all the Disney-era films are already out on home media. So a lot of the security issues with anyone outside of those originally sent screeners for those films have kind of become a moot point for the most part. But also, if the idea was really to control the distribution and where these screeners would eventually end up in secondhand sales and things like that, basically it seems like, whether it's the horses are out of the barn or out of the gate or something like that at this point. Because if you look on eBay, you will see these constantly all over eBay. It's not like it's something that's really being controlled at the moment, probably because the main concern of keeping them secure is before a retail release. So we're going to address these things as we go here. We're going to look at 5 different Disney-era live-action film Star Wars screeners for a total of 4 of the live-action films. Yes, one of them has 2, it's kind of an oddball, and one I don't have. So we'll start with the one I actually don't have. The one that I don't have is a screener for The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens hit theaters in 2015, hit home video in 2016, and in the interim, it was, of course, awards season, and they would have gotten a screener, presumably. I say presumably because the only evidence I have ever seen that there is a The Force Awakens screener out there is one picture online. I ask around the Star Wars home video collecting community. If anybody knows of anything like that, they always point to that same picture. But it fits what we saw with other screeners from Disney at the time. So presumably it does exist. I've just not been able to find a copy. If you do have a line on The Force Awakens as a screener, definitely hit me up. It presumably looks something like this. This is Avengers: The Age of Ultron, also from 2015. But this style of screener would basically have been what you would have seen for The Force Awakens in 2015. This is what that original one picture I've seen of it would suggest as well in terms of the orientation. It's important because the orientation here is vertical, portrait style, rather than horizontal, as we will see everything else has. So, no, I don't have The Force Awakens. I'm still hunting it, but if you're looking for it, hopefully I find it before you. Sorry, just saying. Yeah, the style of it would be something like this, like what we see there for Age of Ultron. It boggles my mind that Age of Ultron and Force Awakens both came out in 2015, or at least both went as screeners in 2015. Then we get to the other films, and starting with Rogue One and going through all but Solo, the format was pretty standard throughout here. And we'll talk a bit more about various aspects of it as we go. This is the screener, the DVD screener of Rogue One. For your consideration, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, Awards Screener. Then on the spine, it says Secure Screener. I'll talk more about what makes it secure in a moment. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, Awards Screener. There is like a product number-y looking thing underneath here. I don't know if it's an ID number or a product number, so I'm playing it safe and covering it so I don't get anybody in trouble who might have tossed these onto eBay years and years and years ago, if anybody still cares about that. And then, on the back, you've got the awards, right? So, for your consideration, screeners typically will say, for your consideration, or FYC. That's how people abbreviate it, FYC, because it's meant to get awards people to watch the program and perhaps actually consider the people they're nominating as recipients for the award. So we have suggested nominations here. Then little notice down here, recycle symbol, and the date of 2016. For what it's worth, the for consideration here was Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, Best Visual Effects, and Best Original Score. We then have the notice at the bottom that this is a secure screener. And the idea is that basically they want to keep screeners from getting out into the wild, because before a retail release, really the only way you could see it, outside of someone like taking a camera into a theater or something, would be if someone actually got their hands on a legitimate copy and somehow let it out into the wild, either by uploading it online or using some kind of master to make bootlegs and sell it. Neither of which is good for the company putting out the film, because it undermines their future retail sales and their ticket sales if it's still in theaters. So what they did for this generation of screeners is they went through and basically each screener has a watermark on the film itself. I can't see it with my crappy eyesight here, but the idea being that each one is watermarked. So if somebody were to say rip a DVD and use it to make bootleg copies, or rip a DVD and upload it online, they would be able to tell who did it, because there'd be an individualized watermark linked to that individual, as the discs themselves are also individually numbered, linked to whoever they were initially sent to. There's usually some language about, you should not do this, don't sell, etc., etc., etc. Again, that case pretty much made it so that that's, by my understanding, kind of a legal non-issue somewhat. But we'll find that these actually had an interesting way of trying to sort of get around that legal hurdle to try to almost create a terms of service for screeners. For what it's worth, by the way, nowadays, not as big a deal to try to keep things secure when it comes to screeners because typically they're not sent out physically at all anymore. Typically, they're just put out through streaming through some type of secure website that only people doing the reviews and whatnot have access to. And presumably if they download them, there'll be some way to track that still as well. At this point, I believe the main one that Disney uses, at least the only one I know about that Disney uses, is called Disney Debut. I'm sorry, I'm getting a correction here. It is Disney Debut. It's just funnier to call it Disney Debut every time. But that website is basically a secure site for people to go in who are like with the Academy Awards or whatever to watch stuff, to get a sense of whether they want to vote for it in various categories and whatnot. So the era of physical screeners, at least for Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment, or in this case just Walt Disney Studios, just isn't really a thing anymore. They're definitely into a more secure way of doing it. But this was a middle ground between those very unsecure previous screeners and this era in which you could use digital tools to try to make things more secure, or at least traceable if someone were to try to undermine your profits, undermine your company, undermine your intellectual property by bootlegging whatever it is. Fortunately for collectors, it's less of an issue because we're collecting these long after the fact, long after a retail release. And frankly, collectors aren't the ones who are going to be out there bootlegging. Collectors want them for their collections, not to go in there and undermine the very market that they enjoy collecting. It would be sort of self-defeating for someone who is a home video collector to bootleg something. I would add that when it comes to being a collector, these are substandard ways of viewing the films. There are no bonus features, but a lot of more recent DVDs don't have bonus features anyway. But if you're trying to watch these and get the best presentation out, if you are someone who just is into Star Wars and wants to watch Rogue One or whatever it might be, you're going to watch it streaming in HD or 4K. You're going to watch a Blu-ray for HD, a 4K disc for 4K. You're probably not going to watch it on DVD. And not one of these DVDs. It's kind of counterproductive to hunt down a screener to watch the film these days after retail release because there are much better ways to watch. It's more of a collector's niche kind of thing only. But you've got your packaging there. Inside, you have a little holder for the disc. Same stuff that was on the back there. Same little warning thing as well. And then you have the disc itself. Okay, again, I'm going to cover up. There's a barcode and a unique number underneath that I believe goes back to whoever it was that put this on eBay. I'm going to cover that here. Okay, but we have up at the top, for your consideration, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, information out of being a secure screener again, and then over off to the side, running time, NTSC, and then copyright date. Just black text with the logo and all on a white background. We will talk a little bit more about what I mean with the secure thing and sort of trying to create almost like a terms of service for screeners here once we have looked at the other ones here. But don't worry, we will come back to it. Next up, we have The Last Jedi. And mine are all kind of like this. You can see it kind of as a lip because they're kind of this weird, almost triangular shape to them. So the top part tends to flop down after a while. But for your consideration, Star Wars The Last Jedi Awards Screener. Again, for your consideration, I realize now that what I'm holding down here is probably American Motion Picture Association as an AMPAS thing, but I'll cover it anyway because I did with the other ones here. But you got sort of the same thing here. In this case, it is Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, Best Visual Effects, Best Original Score, and Best Shirtless Scene. Sorry, no, that was just the meme that people make of Kylo Ren for that last one. Again, on top, secure screener, name of the film, award screener. Inside, effectively the same thing again here. And then disc-wise, a similar setup here as what we saw with Rogue One. And by the way, these are DVD-R discs. That gives you the sense of just how few of these would have been made for this specific purpose rather than like mass production for retail. Then we'll skip Solo for a second because it's kind of an oddball. And then we've got The Rise of Skywalker. Right, the last Star Wars live-action film to be released thus far. Probably the last one to get a physical screener. For your consideration, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. I would note here, for your consideration is not as bold as it is on the other two. And it doesn't say award screener down at the bottom. But it is. On the top, it no longer says anything about screener. It's just the title with the AMPAS thing over here that, again, I'll cover just for the heck of it because I started doing that. On the back, you got your information about the nominations, again, for your consideration. That has a different categories here, and then a little notice in copyright and all for 2019, because, again, it's when the movie came out, just what it's copyrighted to, not when the home video release came out there a little bit later. As for the categories here, we have a Best Picture, Best Film Editing, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Score, Best Visual Effects, Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, and Best Hey Hey. Again, sorry, that last one was just my preference here. Love that Babu Frick. Inside, similar setup here. You've got your warning stuff here. You got your, for your consideration, what it's being nominated for. Interestingly, this one actually has a warning about several sequences of flashing lights that may affect viewers who are susceptible to photosensitive epilepsy or other photosensitivities. All the flashing, presumably on Exegol with the lightning and all that here. In this case, same ones we saw on the other side as far as the for your consideration. I almost just read it all out again. And then you've got the disc itself. For your consideration, Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, information about the screener, runtime, copyright, all that kind of stuff, awards, NTSC, it says on that one. Now again, all of those are substandard ways of watching those films. Even if you weren't, taken aback by the fact that, it's something that is watermarked, not that you're ever going to notice it when watching it, you're probably not going to be watching it because, again, it's DVD rather than HD or 4K. That came a little bit later. It's more of a collector's piece at this point. It gets a little bit closer to something, at least rationally something you'd likely watch as we get towards Solo, because there are two different versions of the Solo screener out there. Now, for whatever reason, Solo's approach was different. This little thing is the Solo DVD screener. For your consideration, Solo: A Star Wars Story Awards screener. On the back, for your consideration, Best Visual Effects is the only thing that's being suggested here. For home use, blah, 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 kind of the legalese type stuff here, and the copyright date that's on it, in this case of 2019. Interestingly, nothing about secure anything on it, and when you look at the disc itself, for your consideration, Solo: A Star Wars Story, it still says NTSC with the runtime and all, and it does have some stuff over it, but it's that whole for home use only, not necessarily screener use only here, and there is no individual numbering or anything like that on this one. Still set up the same way as the others, pretty much, but kind of, again, a sort of a substandard way of watching it. One of the other things that made these substandard to watch it, if you're like me, where you like to have subtitles on so you can see the words, because, sometimes your hearing might fail you, which happens with me a lot. I watch almost everything with subtitles on at this point. There are no options for subtitles or anything on the other ones we just looked at. They're all just the regular film, no subtitles, no fluff, nothing, just here, watch it, vote. On Solo, on DVD, you actually do have the ability to turn on subtitles. You can watch with or without subtitles. I would also note these appear to have been mass-produced more rather than something maybe in-house there, because they are not DVD-R discs. But more interestingly, and it's one of these things is not like the other kind of things, if this is a DVD screener, there is another, there is another. I don't know what I'm saying no to, but if you thought there was only one, no, there is another, maybe? Here's the other one. Notice the big difference there, the Blu-ray symbol. Yes, Solo got a Blu-ray screener. Still the same design. For your consideration, Solo: A Star Wars Story Awards screener, but it has Blu-ray disc here, very prominently. The same kind of setup here to the back. Obviously, there's no, it's just a sleeve, so there's no spine or anything to show there. And then disc-wise, set up the same way, just with Blu-ray disc over there on the side. And yes, this is a high-definition version of it. So at least in the case of Solo, if you're not going to watch in 4K, watching the screener is kind of like watching one of the home media releases. You might watch that instead, possibly. You just don't want to mess it up or anything like that. But it's the closest we come to something that is like home media release quality that people would usually watch something on to actually make its way into screener form for these, at least to my knowledge. Again, it wasn't about home viewing quality. It was about watch this, judge it, give us some awards, please, each time. Now, what I find interesting about these is the thing that I mentioned before about how they tried to deal with some security issues. So in the United States, there was this court case, UMG Recordings, Inc. v. Augusto. You can find information about it on like Wikipedia and whatnot. But basically, it was Universal Media Group had these promotional CDs, and the CDs wound up going on eBay. And there was this argument that this was violating something from UMG for this person who was sent these promotional CDs to put them out for later sale. And essentially under the idea that the printed licenses on the DVDs, or in this case CDs, were essentially invalid on their face in terms of what they tried to purport to be or tried to restrict. And the idea that something that is sent as a screener or a promotional item is basically a gift to whoever is receiving it. That basically made it part of the first sale doctrine, so whoever has it, they now own it, they have every right to resell it, give it away, whatever. This was back in 2008. It was there's an affirmation and whatnot with the case in 2011. So right as we're sort of heading towards the Disney era, basically here is a U.S. court, or a couple of U.S. courts, basically saying if you send something out as a screener, you can't control who they then turn around and sell it to, no matter what threatening language you put on the disc or on the packaging or whatever. Again, the idea being that it's less about the control of who has it per se, and much more about we are going to make sure there are no bootlegs. So how do we make it so that there's a way to make sure that this is not getting into the hands, not of the people voting for it, but unscrupulous people who might go out there and try to undermine our ability to sell this at retail or sell tickets by putting it out online or in physical media form as bootlegs. How do we police that and somehow get around this ruling, or at least comply with the ruling but still try to put that pressure on? And the way they did it was a very interesting way of authoring the discs themselves. You're familiar with the idea that when you pop in a DVD, a lot of times there's stuff you can't skip, or it'll go to a menu and you might want to be watching something that's on it that's kind of buried on a different menu. Like maybe you're trying to watch Forces of Destiny Ewok Escape on one of the discs for Coco that we looked at recently. The disc is in, but you got to go to like the sneak peeks and then eventually find it, and kind of going through different layers of menus to actually get to what you want to see. The way that the disc is authored, that thing is probably a separate title in the way that the DVD is authored. And if you have like a computer program, you might be able to just click the title and go straight to it. But if you're putting it in a regular DVD player, chances are you're sort of locked into having to go through the labyrinthine structure. You might be forced to watch some previews at first or something like that. Just kind of the way that DVDs tended to be authored. Well, in this case, they were authored with what is basically an attempt at creating a terms of service through the menu system. You put one of these in and it starts out with a warning that basically says that, hey, this is watermarked. This is traceable to you as the individual that we just issued this to. Don't you dare bootleg this thing. Then it goes to a second screen that basically just reiterates that and gives the person the option to either accept or decline those conditions of being able to watch the film. You can click one or the other. Click accept. You are, at least in the minds of those behind the creation of the menu structure, you are agreeing to those terms. Now, whether or not that's enforceable or not, that's a whole other thing. But again, it was less about we're going to go after these people who aren't bootlegging, and more, if someone bootlegged, we can go back and trace and say, look, they knew this was not okay. So they can't come up with this defense claiming that somehow they thought it was fine to rip and upload our movie online or something. Interestingly, if you then decline, it gives you one more chance by giving you another screen that's basically like a, are you sure? And of course, if you choose, no, I'm not sure, I do want to accept, I apologize, basically, then yeah, it's just like if you hit accept on the previous screen. But if you say, yeah, I do want to decline, I don't agree to this, click, it's an infinite loop. It goes right back to that previous screen where it's basically decline, yes, I want to decline, decline, yes, I want to decline, decline, yes, I want to decline, over and over again in a loop, never actually getting out of that to the film itself. Again, unless you're watching on like a computer and then all you're doing is clicking title, right, to jump to the actual material here. So it was an interesting approach to be taken in those later years. You couldn't use some kind of secure login because it wasn't streaming. You were sending them out to people who apparently legally had the ability to sell them off or get rid of them, but you still want to try to make sure that they don't do that. So what do? You try to express your intention and try to build it into what is essentially sort of a quasi-terms of service-y thing into the actual disc itself. A really interesting, very creative approach to trying to do that. Probably the last hurrah of physical screeners and an interesting indication of where we were in terms of current secure digital screeners versus those previous ones that really didn't have any tracking and just were sent out into the wild, where unfortunately bootlegging became somewhat common over the era of VHS into DVD. So yeah, an interesting kind of eclectic little corner of Star Wars home video collecting. Screeners did reach the Disney era. I just had never shown it before. I've had many of these in my collection for years, just usually shortly after the retail release when they became less sought after on places like eBay. I was able to then find them because it just started flooding onto the eBay market. You can find pretty much all these very commonly on eBay at this point all the time. So it's pretty easy to get a collection of these. But for a while there, they were a little tougher to find. And of course, The Force Awakens I have not managed to get my hands on at this point. Just a fun little niche, like I said. Not something I'm going to typically watch, but cool to have in the collection. And when collectors get their hands on these, I always tend to kind of smile because it's great and fun for the collector, but you also know that the likelihood of that collector doing anything nefarious with it, one, is long out of date, so it wouldn't happen anyway. But even if they were getting it right when it was being released, I don't think they would probably do it. Right? Collectors are just a different mindset. Collectors typically don't want to undermine the market that they're collecting from. It's a love of the stuff that gets them to do it in the first place. So, I said, it's a weird thing to be collecting, but it is a piece of that collecting history here. And I guess I should say that if anybody higher up doesn't actually want this episode to still be out showcasing these, guess I'll come up with some other episode number 500. But just a fun little thing here I did want to show for those who do collect screeners, because yes, they're out there for the Disney era films, and they're pretty common to come by. If you're looking for something more rare, you're going to need to find something like that Episode 1 VHS screener or something like that from years ago. But they're out there, and it is really sort of marking the end of an era of screeners with this group of physical screeners. As I guess we mark the end of one era and the beginning of a new as we pass the 500 episode mark here for regular numbered episodes from the Star Wars Home Video Library. With that, again, my thanks to all of you who have been watching for this past 600 plus episodes, including all the ones that aren't part of this initial numbering of 500. I appreciate your support over the years. I hope you have found this interesting and worthy of coverage for an episode 500. But with that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers. But not the bootleggers. If you got a screener and you used it to bootleg, you've undermined what we like to collect, and that's not cool. So shame on you.